Did your brain just leave your body?
With incredible rapidity and speed, yes, it left my head and I've never had a thought in my life. Oh, this is how everyone will start, and I'm okay with that. That's how it goes.
Yeah. Hi,
Hello,
I'm Kira,
I'm Emma.
and this is the Z Space 9 podcast,
It is indeed.
where we, two friends, read Animorphs, a 90s kids book series about turning into animals, and also watch Star Trek Deep Space Nine, a 90s television show about,
A 90s television show about intergalactic politics and the wake of war.
And I swear they are more similar than that sounds.
And not just because they're both from the 90s.
Yes. Although that is a factor.
It's okay.
So today we watched the 2-part opening to Star Trek Deep Space Nine, The Emissary, Part 1 and Part 2. I actually don't know how they titled Part 2 because I just watched them.
I'm pretty sure it was just Part 2. I think it was just Part 1 and Part 2 originally.
And Animorphs Book 1, The Invasion. And now we're gonna attempt to summarize what happened in both of these. Do you want to take Animorphs? Because you don't.
Yeah,
because it was new for you.
Yeah,
and I'll take the assignment.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Pardon me while I scan aggressively through all of my notes. I swear I did in fact read it very much. My notes just got out of control extremely fast. Yeah. So, Animorphs Book 1, The Invasion, follows a group of teens. It's narrated in first person by Jake, who's one of the teens, who is writing it down or telling it epistolarily to you, the reader, as kind of a story/warning. It follows them as they discover a crashed, essentially, alien flying saucer and are pulled into a conflict. They're told by I swear I'm going to get the names right. I swear. I promise you.
I'm so not.
And I'm so sorry. There we go.
Once we get to the Cardassians, I'm just going to be like, one warlord.
Star Trek has so many names.
I know.
Just a really incredible number of them.
I know.
But yeah, Animorphs, these teens find a crashed alien spaceship with an alien inside called an Andalite, who is grievously injured, but warns them. He says that he is warning them about an invasion of other aliens called the Yeerks, who take over life forms, who take over life forms' bodies and possess them, and that the Yeerks are already on Earth and are seeking to take over the planet, take over the human race, and that the Andalites fight against them. He is dying and is being hunted by his enemies, but before he dies, he gives these teens the power to transform into other creatures, such as animals, perhaps even morph into them. You will see that there is perhaps a reason behind the series title, as I did. I saw it and I went, yay, there's a reason, I see it. The teens are drawn into a whirlwind of several days of learning to use their new powers and shapeshift into animals. They have to touch animals to be able to do so, and trying to track down the Yeerks amongst their friends, families, and neighbors, and often flee for their lives. And they get kind of more used to it and win some and lose some, and that's the conclusion of that book. That's what happens. It ended and I went, oh boy.
Awesome.
Uh-huh.
So, Star Trek...
Animorphs.
Star Trek Deep Space Nine, The Emissary Part 1 and Part 2, follows Captain Benjamin Sisko. It starts off with a prologue in another Star Trek show that I didn't watch.
Next Generation, timeline of Next Generation.
In which a Borg Captain Picard, something Picard, uh, destroys Cisco's ship, killing his wife Jennifer, and leaving Cisco as an only father to his son Jake, who is not related to Jake from the Animorphs.
Oh, that's another similarity.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A couple years later, Cisco and Jake are living sort of, I think, normalish lives for this universe, where then they're assigned to Deep Space Nine in the wake of the ending of a conflict between Cardassia and Bajor. So for a while, Cardassia has been occupying Bajor, and now that they've come to a tenuous agreement.
Heavily tenuous.
Yes, and a provisional government has been set up, and Cisco is sort of the voice of the Federation, coming to sort of mediate this peace between them. Cisco arrives on DS9. It is trashed, and everybody's fleeing because they know that this provisional peace will not last. Cisco undertakes this job of being the leader of this derelict spaceship, but is not happy about it, not least because it has been assigned to him by Picard, the person who killed his wife. Following this, he is told by Major Kira, one of his lieutenants, one of the people in his crew, that he must go to Kaiopaka to make sure that, because she's the only one who can kind of keep this government together, and she has to spiritually convince all of these factions in Bajor not to fall into civil war and stand united against Cardassia, who's still a threat. So Cisco does go, but is told that he must look inside himself for answers and basically come to a spiritual awakening before Kaiopaka will do the political thing. Yeah. And she shows him an orb that is kind of their spiritual center of power, which thrusts Cisco into a vision of his dead wife a long time ago. Following this, we get introductions to a lot of the staples of Cisco's crew. There's O'Brien, who's the chief engineer. Kira Nerys, obviously, was the major, who is both kind of Cisco's lieutenant, but also the voice of Bajor. There's Odo, the security officer. Quark, who Cisco kind of strong arms into being his entertainment guy.
First head of trade, finance, corporation, business on the
eyes
station.
on the ground. And Dax, his science officer, who is a Trill, who I'm sure we will be talking about.
That was one of my first notes here.
Yeah. There's also Dr. Julian Bashir. There's medical officer. Emma just did a fist bump.
Sorry. Bashir, I'll be normal about Bashir during this podcast, and that's a promise.
Who's very young, untested, but aching for glory. Dax helps Cisco sort of catalog this weird spiritual orb. They track it to a distant part of space. and they get sucked inside. It turns out to be a wormhole / time creature. Some Dax comes out the other side, but Cisco doesn't. And the fact that it is a wormhole means that it's, and a stable wormhole, means that it would be a political gold mine for both Cardassia and Bajor. So it's sort of a race to see who will get to it first. There's some stuff with the warlords, also, who are trying to regain their power, and also don't believe that the wormhole exists. So when a warlord disappears from the space in that region, they will not believe that they got sucked into the stable wormhole, and instead threaten to open fire on DS9. Meanwhile, Cisco is teaching the time creature baseball. No. That's an unkind summary.
But it's also completely accurate.
Cisco is trying to teach the time wormhole creature what linear time is. Well, the wormhole time creature is attempting to show to Cisco the nature of his grief, as sort of a stuck point in that linear time. Cisco comes to terms with his grief. The wormhole creature agrees to let people through the wormhole. Cisco comes out the other side, accepts the call to adventure, and becomes officially the leader of DS9, telling Picard to forget that he asks not to be. And I mean, the warlord stuff is still outstanding. So yeah.
They really... A lot happens in the first two-parter of DS9.
A lot happens in the first book of Animorphs. We should get better at these summaries. We should maybe, write them before.
To be fair, it is also, both... A lot of my notes have to do with the fact that both are really fun, how to throw you into a story in a world and be like, let's set up a bunch of dominoes that I can, in one case, know will be falling in the future, in the other case, I'm sure will be, but have not yet had confirmed.
No, of course, they'll stay up. They'll stay up.
Yeah, every domino.
Domino.
Every domino will stay up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, if you didn't watch our intro video, Video? Yeah.
Video? If you didn't listen to our intro audio, which you should, because it's a beautiful work,
I am only semi-familiar with DS9. Emma's not really familiar with Animorphs at all, so we're both coming at this from a place of semi-blindness. So, what did you think of the first book of Animorphs?
Oh boy, I liked it so much.
That's good. I can't imagine trying to do this.
I liked it. Oh no, this is where I hated it. We're ending this. No, I really, really liked it. I love reading books. I love reading books as an adult, and this happened a few times to me recently, that are, books that I could have read when I was in middle and high school but didn't, and having the experience of both. I'm really enjoying reading this now, and I wish I'd read this even earlier because it's that good.
Right.
Which is what I was experiencing with Animorphs. I was like, damn, I should have picked these up way sooner. This is great. I really enjoyed it. That's not the most helpful analytical thought. It's just the personal thought.
No, I think what struck me, especially reading it and then immediately watching DS9, was how made for kids it is. Not in a derogatory way.
No, yeah.
It's that it both knows its target audience and is focused on that perspective of its target audience in a way that's really respectful to those people's problems.
Exactly, yeah. It was very felt very, again, not derogatory, meant as a compliment. Like, I was reading it thinking this is very designed for kids and designed for kids to step into,
Right.
where not that there aren't many stories written for adults that are designed for adults to step into to some perspective, but a lot of, young adult literature is very much the boundaries of it's designed with the intent to allow you to kind of experience yourself through it a lot more, because it's being, stories are there for kids as they're growing, I would say. And it felt very, yeah, exactly, I said, very, very angled towards kids and teens and the points of stress and fear that they have. One of the things that stood out to me was the elements of, you can't necessarily trust adults, you can't necessarily trust older friends or siblings in your life. You can probably trust your friends, but also you're at odds with them all the time, and so you both feel completely alone and also bonded with everyone else in your specific age group in a way that nobody who's older than you is going to really get. Which I think is pretty true to a lot of the elementary through high school experience, that isolation, but also like, no one who's an adult looking in will get what the stressed kids are going through.
Yeah.
That's magnified because there's death and danger.
Yeah. Well, I think, watching, like, experiencing these two media, I was sort of like looking for commonalities that I could come into this conversation with, and what struck me that I didn't necessarily get just reading Animorphs the first time was especially like Marco's reason for not wanting to join with the Animorphs, especially compared to like what Cisco is thinking. So Marco, his reason for not wanting to fight is that his dad will like not survive without him. He's gone through family tragedy. His mom has passed away a couple years earlier. His dad is in a deep depression, and Marco feels like he's basically taking care of his dad. And if he were to go and die, his father would not like survive that. Meanwhile, Cisco is kind of dealing with a similar thing. He's like, I don't want to be on DS9. I gotta take care of Jake. I don't have my wife anymore. Like I can't leave Jake alone. So, but it was just really interesting to see both of those reasons reflected. Because I think like it's very easy to see like from Cisco's perspective, like, yeah, you don't want to leave your kid alone, but it's sometimes hard to see that the kid would also have that perspective.
The responsibility for the parents.
Right. Yeah. I thought that was really cool.
It was really, really great. That's one of several things that I hit that I was like, this is great. It's complete. It's a very kind of nuanced, very realistic thing that's also extreme, like immediately easy to understand. It doesn't have to be it's very simple and also very incisive at the same time, which is that sense of responsibility for like, I'm very young, but also I'm carrying the weight of my older family members on my shoulder because I'm understanding how much they care about me and how much we've lost already. I really liked the entire, in Animorphs, we get introduced to the main cast of teens, which is, and if I get any of the names wrong, I will correct myself, which is Jake, Rachel, Marco, Cassie, and Tobias are the five who are together walking through a construction site as a shortcut home, which is real. That's a mood.
Have you walked through construction?
I don't know if it's a construction site, but I certainly understand the experience of like, this is probably not the ideal route, but what's the worst that could happen? And in this case, the worst that could happen is that an alien crash lands in front of them and changes their lives forever. But they are the five who receive the shape-shifting powers. They all have varying degrees of knowing each other. Jake and Rachel are cousins. Jake and Marco are close friends. Rachel and Cassie are also close friends. Jake perhaps kind of has a crush on Cassie. Tobias is known to all of them and seems to kind of be potentially a little bit more of an outsider amongst their peer group, but is still somebody that they know.
Yeah.
And I loved they feel like they could all really be friends reasonably, first of all.
Yeah, it was really interesting seeing the construction of both ensembles. Because, and I think this comes from, like, the bigger question of how do you begin a series, which we can talk about.
Yeah.
But it
one
feels
of the things
like...
I was thinking about the most.
Right, yeah.
Story construction.
Yeah, but it feels like Animorphs constructs its characters as a team first, and then sort of goes from there. And DS9 does this in reverse, where they're constructing the individual characters first, and then they're like pushing them together. So Animorphs coalesces a lot faster as a group because they're designed to like fill really specific narrative roles.
Mm-hmm.
And their conflict comes externally and then like internally for each character. And then at least in Emissary, what I noticed is they're DS9, not a team. It doesn't like they're professionals. They can work together, but they're not like this instant like ride or die like ensemble that Animorphs is. So their construction comes from characters clashing against characters.
Yeah, I really that's a really good way of phrasing that. Yeah, absolutely. It's like the Animorphs characters still have. I really like that we got immediately 5 very distinct perspectives on, oh my god, we can shapeshift and there's an alien invasion. Like, they have 5 really different viewpoints on that, but are also immediately bonded by, we all got this information and this power, same time, same way, communal shared event and traumatic experience. Yeah. And we're also all this group of teens, same school and area of living, navigating it together. So even as they're bickering amongst each other, they're still very like, we're in this together immediately, for better or worse. And then DS9 coming off the, actually, you know, that's not to throw it back to DS9 for a moment, but DS9, in rewatching it, I kind of knew this, but it's been a little while since I watched the pilot and remembered how much everyone is coming from their different places, and also it's coming off of the heels of this other story, which is Star Trek The Next Generation.
Yeah. And the Wolf 359 jump scare.
Which I always forget and was like, wow.
Yeah, I think I also, so I watched the first season and a half of DS9, like, almost 10 years ago. It was a while.
So many years, oh god.
No, we're
not thinking about it. It's fine. Time is a circle.
So
time is linear. As we learned in the Emissary.
Yes. So, but I had forgotten how, like, specifically Cisco-centric this episode was. Like, I had sort of, like, I remembered, of course, or at least kind of assumed that this was, like, building of an ensemble and Cisco's the main character and our POV for this. But baked within that is a really, like, individual, introspective, personal story about grief. Like a mini Arrival. And it really surprised me, rewatching it.
It's such a great, I feel like it's such a great and really deftly done way to start a series too, because of all of the themes that you're going to be like, this is the one where we're starting our multi-person ensemble series that we know is, I mean, I don't know how much they knew at the time, but that's got a lot of plot and politics going on, being like, we're also doing a very specific, like the nature of personal grief of losing important people in your life, which is a pretty universal theme, is a really cool place to put that as like your foundational block of the whole show.
Yeah, I guess that leads me into what appears to be both of our like defining questions of like this set of. I'm going to have to find a better word for episodes and books that isn't just not just like media consumption. Yeah, this chunk of what we consume.
Chapter.
Yeah.
Chapter.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. This chapter, which is how do you begin a series? Because beginning a series is like setting up your tone, your themes, and it's promising the audience that this is the foundation. This is what we're going to expand on, and tell this story about. And it's really interesting to see, how both of these series do that.
Animorphs, I had a really great time with. I've thought a lot recently as a creator, as I just mess around with things that I've worked on or not, about sometimes one of the easiest things to forget, I feel like, in creating and in starting a story is things have to happen. And that feels really silly, but it is something that I personally struggle with in writing, when sometimes I will reread my writing from a while ago and be like, this is really fun and interesting and has a lot of free language. I'm not having a lot of events happen in the plot.
Yeah.
And Animorphs is really great about things are happening. I can put the plot points next to each other and there's a lot going on and it's very easy to track and it's really interesting and tense. A saucer crash lands. We are running for our lives. We learn how to shapeshift. We learn that people that we know and trust are perhaps enemies and thus we really can't escape this problem.
We try to destroy the Yerk pool and completely
fail. Which I also love because it makes perfect, like, I can see a world where that's a, like, triumphant, dramatic, we've embraced them and succeeded now, and I like that it's not. I like that they mess it up really badly, which makes perfect sense.
That's one of my other notes about, the victories at the end. Victories. And what they say about what kind of story this might be. So, DS9, I would say, is slightly more victorious.
I would agree with that. Very, very much so.
Yeah, they achieve a political victory by getting to the wormhole first, establishing this base, and Cisco achieves his character victory by, accepting his grief and moving forward on his path of linear time. And the best that can be said about Animorphs is that they survive.
Don't die.
They don't die. And they allegedly save a single person, which probably will not last. But that, I guess, that is, sort of part of their thesis, which is that, it is a victory to have saved one person for however long. It is a victory to be alive. Tobias is alive, even though he is.
That was going to be another thing. That's one of the things that. Oh, Tobias. Yeah, there's a lot of people with T names in this first. There's a lot of people with T names that are relevant at the end of this. Actually, what wasn't in for reference towards the back half for those that have not read it of the Invasion, the first Animorph book. Jake, who is our main narrator at this time, and also potentially shifting into team leader, has one of the other teens tell him basically, you're kind of the one who we need to make decisions, which I find fascinating in that, on the one hand, I can see that somewhat in the narrative. On the other hand, that's always an interesting thing to get told by another character to you when you're put into that role, especially
Yeah, what did you think about that?
I thought it was interesting. I thought it was... I can see it, but I can also... I can... It's something I'm excited to see develop, because on the one hand, it does make sense in that we have... When they're first going through their kind of initial fight or flight challenge, which is watching the crashed Andalite, who has given them powers, get tracked down and get killed. They all have very different, interesting, really revealing character reactions to it. Jake is the one who has kind of a burst of fury and starts going to try to engage in this deeply unwinnable fight before the others pull him back. Mm-hmm. So he is the one that has, the most immediate action response to take aggression.
Yeah.
And I think it's fascinating that gets paired with you're the one who we need to be our leader to make decisions, because those aren't the same thing necessarily. And I also think that there is, especially when it's teens, a lot to be said for getting put into a role such as you're the leader now, when that might not be the most fitting for you.
Right.
So I'm excited to see how much of that becomes fulfilling in a good way, in a bad way, of having him be cast as that earliest on.
Yeah. Oh, we should totally talk about roles and there's so much.
There's so much to go. They're so good, and they work really well together.
Well, that's good because I was the one who said we should do this.
But yes, to return to before I forget about it. Tom, who is the brother of Jake, our narrator of this first book, we learn has a yerk in his brain. The aliens that take over / possess. I'm trying to find the precise terminology, though I have not seen too much of them yet, so we will see for how they operate, that briefly take over or possess life forms, not just humans, also do that with other alien species, some of which have now arrived on Earth with them. And so there is some truly, truly excellent, that I loved, interpersonal and psychological horror of having someone that you know that's very close to you, that a member of family, that is suddenly possessed by an alien and not in their right mind and out to get you. The teens go to try to save Tom and a variety of other people that are under this effect and don't succeed. And initially, it looks kind of like Tom dies in that struggle, at least how I read it. And we do get the reveal shortly thereafter that he is not dead, but is still under your control, which is
maybe worse,
which I loved. I loved that initially, upon thinking he might have fallen off the staircase and died, I was like, wow, that's a heavy place to start that. And honestly, it would have been the moment when Jake is lying in bed and Tom arrives back in the house and things are returned to that state is equally terrible. It's pretty terrible and pretty bad. Even though it leaves like a little bit of hope. But...
yeah, and
there's Tobias.
Yeah, in the struggle, the teens are kind of split up. They go to their house and kind of like hope that the others survived, I guess. And then as Jake is lying in his bed at night, a hawk comes tapping at his window. It's Tobias, who has, at this point in the book, I think that there's been plenty of foreshadowing of Tobias's kind of recklessness and reliance on this hawk morph. But Jake says basically, morph back. You know, the Andalite said that we can only stay in this morph for 2 hours or we'll be stuck. And Tobias is like, at least I'm alive.
I have bad news for how long I was in that form. Yeah, it was really well set up and really, really well done, where immediately once we start getting into mentions of Tobias as the book progressed, I was like, I can see where this is going at some point, where we are told that Tobias has a very rough home life, that he is finding a lot of freedom and comfort in specifically this ability to morph into a bird and just fly away. He refuses to learn other morphs because he talks about how he's happy with just the hawk morph. And then we get the consistent reminder of, like, you have to turn back after 2 hours. I clocked all of that and was going, okay, this feels like something that is going to hit later down the line in a couple books. It did not. It hit at the end of the first book, which I'm here for. It was great. It didn't feel too sudden. It felt like a really great kind of culmination of the stakes and really realistic choice. And it's great, and it's bittersweet of the, like, you're alive, you survived the encounter at least, but
yeah, and
no.
Again, it brings us back to, like, how do you begin a series? What is the promise that you're making? And I think in Animorphs choosing to sort of shoot that bullet right out the gate. It's saying that Tobias as a hawk is baked in part of its promise to the audience. It's part of the themes of this story that is foundational. But yeah, so returning quickly to the victories or not non-victories at the end, I think that's also really reflective of sort of both the promises that these series are making, but also again the perspectives they're taking, which are like, so both victories in terms of their overall stakes are pretty small, because it's not like DS9 has suddenly resolved the entire conflict between Cardassia and Bajor. They've achieved a step, but really what they've done is kind of preserve the government that's already in place that was about to collapse, which is good, but still just like a really tenuous government. So they've essentially preserved a sort of status quo. And then obviously the victory, if you can call it that, the Animorphs achieved is like, we didn't die.
They're alive. Their anonymity is preserved, which is another big one. Is that they're not spotted. The only person that spots them, in another really great chilling moment, the only person that has linked one of them to the ability to shapeshift, which is the police officer that initially finds Cassie, is gone now. And in the words of Jake, Cassie's not talking about what happened. So their identities, their secret super identities are preserved, and one person is saved, and they didn't die.
Yeah,
and that's it.
So it goes to show kind of like the stakes and the players. The stakes of the Animorphs are just like, we need to survive. We need to live through this long enough that the aliens can come and rescue us. And the stakes of DS9 are like these grander politics. The players in DS9 are like adults with like some say in government, how their political factions are working, and the Animorphs are children. It was really like, and not just because we have two Jakes, but it was like I was thinking about Jake the entire, because I think Jake Sisko is the same age as Jake would be.
Yeah.
In Animorphs.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
Like,
that's
what is Jake, like 15?
Yeah, I believe.
Okay, then
in DS9, yeah, I believe so.
Then Jake is younger.
Wow. Yeah, I will need to double check that, but yeah, Jake is mid-teens, not late high school. Late middle school, early high school, I believe, at the start of the series.
Yeah, I think the Animorphs are firmly in middle school.
Yeah. Sorry, all of my protective adult instincts were just activated at once, which is like, oh my god, they're in middle school? Not that high school's better, but good lord. Yeah, no, it's the crazy difference between Jake being obviously present and a very central part of DS9, but as
Jake
you said,
Sisko.
Jake Sisko, but we're seeing that and the responsibility of this team's existence and growth from the perspective of Ben Sisko, and alongside a fleet of other adult characters
who we can trust,
who we can trust, or are at least immediately drawn in by, have questions about, don't seem immediately malevolent. Well, a couple of them, maybe two of them. One of them seems immediately deeply malevolent. One of them seems immediately deeply distrustworthy.
We will get to all the characters, and we will get to the slugs and brains, I promise.
Oh, one of the first things I wrote down was just Yerk and Trills. Wahoo!
Yeah. I couldn't tell you this in the intro episode, but a full, like, it was like...
The second that explanation came up in Chapter 2 of Animorphs, I was like, oh my god, I see it. I already knew these were going to have a lot of overarching similarities based purely on what I understand their plots. But I was like, okay, absolutely, yes. But, yeah, the difference between seeing Jake Sisko still a teen, still worried, but alongside but getting the central cast of adults, competent, we generally trust them for the most part, no one will be following them, versus getting the perspective of only these middle schoolers.
Yeah. So yeah, like in terms of, again, this idea of how do you begin a series, like thematically, like what did you think they set up, for both of them?
Ooh, for both of them. For Animorphs, since that's the one, not that I don't have thoughts on DS9, I'm just more familiar with it. For Animorphs, the themes of death and conflict and identity and sacrifice are all just there right out of the gate, and responsibility mixed in with those of a conflict getting introduced that has world-shattering stakes, but is also resting solely on the shoulders of these kids.
Right.
So there's this sudden, crushing responsibility and demand to kind of reshift and mold their identities as kids to take on this responsibility, and then also to start to reshape and mold themselves physically by taking on the forms of these animals. As they learn to morph, there's the really, really fascinating looks into the brain space of how, when Jake becomes a dog and then a lizard, it changes his thought patterns. He's put into those animal spaces in his mind, and has to kind of try to work with these new sensations. So this conflict that is secret and generally not known about is on the shoulders of these kids, requiring their input, kind of whether they want it or not, because as they say, they don't know if they can they don't believe they can hand it off to anyone without perhaps spelling doom for the end of the world. That's not an option. And not only is that on them emotionally and logistically, but physically, they're also now having to kind of already literally shapeshift to become the people that would be needed to save the world for this. Exactly. And they don't have, and they all come to the conclusion one way or another by the end, even though some of them are way more reluctant than the others, that they don't have a choice other than that. This has been, the ship has landed, the weight has been put on them, and the costs already start to add up by the end, which I think is great and really good. It feels like right out of the gate we get that sense of this is costly, this is scary, and parts of this are your choice, but a lot of it really isn't.
Yeah, I think, and sorry to keep circling back to the end while I'm
go for it.
But it's really interesting because I feel like in Emissary, Sisko, we've talked about the political victory that DS9 achieves, but the character victory that Sisko achieves is that he's really ready to move on. He has faced a conflict in himself, and he's come to terms with it, and he's ready to move forward. He's chosen that. Jake's victory, although he also accepts the call to adventure, is really not about coming to terms with anything that lightens his soul.
Yeah.
He doesn't find internal acceptance. His victory is that he stops denying things. In a way that Sisko stopping denying things helped him. Jake's is sort of
it's It's a very similar, it's so similar and so different all at once.
Right.
Yeah. And that also feels, again, it's so interesting with our two protagonists of each of this, just how what they're hitting by the end of the episode is both so different and so similar, and how much of my experience of that was rooted in their ages.
Right.
Because Cisco ends this two-parter of the Emissary having this moment, having put in a request for Picard to look into finding him a different place to be, and ends with this scene where he goes to Picard and says, "No, I do want to stay here. I want to be the commander of the station." And Picard goes, "Are you sure?" And he says, "Yes, I'm sure." And we see him making this definitive decision for himself, for his family, but and also for himself from this place of like transformative grief we've gone through. And then and Jake of Animorphs is having that acceptance of just like grim reality of being unable to deny it, unable to push it back, which is like a very cold comfort. Yeah. But it's better than living in denial and rose-tinted glasses, I guess. Maybe.
Yeah, and I think...
And he's a kid.
Yeah.
He's in middle school.
He is in middle school.
Oh, God.
Jake Animorphs.
Oh, God.
But, yeah, so I think it's really interesting because both of... Like, there is a... You can argue that they're both starting in the middle of a conflict, right? Mm-hmm. So DS9 is starting in the middle of the Bajor-Cardassia conflict, but also in the middle of this franchise. Animorphs is starting a franchise wholesale, but you can say, that the kids are not plopped into the beginning of your rest of the galaxy conflict. Mm-hmm. That has already been happening around them, like in their neighborhoods. It has infiltrated this already. They're just now in the middle of it. But there's this interesting difference because DS9 is part of this larger like franchise universe and Animorphs is starting it out, where like it feels like DS9 is picking up as another thread in an already woven tapestry. Mm-hmm. And Animorphs, the tapestry it has to begin is like normal life, which is like in some way because of its settings, but mm-hmm. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. There's given that the inciting event of the spaceship crashing Animorph happens truly in like 2.5 pages. Like yes. the book, again, I've been thinking a lot about how sometimes events just need to happen in sequence and you need to just kind of run with them. Mm-hmm. And I love that it doesn't waste time. It starts fast, but there is still that 2 pages before the 2.5 of establishing some normalcy as things then immediately get upheaved, which...
Yeah, well, I think what I was thinking about was that, like, Animorphs is setting up death and cost of war and sacrifice and everything, but it's also, like, the horror of, like, a regular middle-class American life getting infiltrated. The mm-hmm. horror of suburbia. Whereas DS9 is fully just Star Trek universe. There's nothing of like... Well, I mean, of course there's something of like America in there because it's made by America in the 90s. But
it's sci-fi in the far future versus Animorphs starting out by being purposefully vague about time and place for the intent where one of the first things Jake says, which is a great way to start, especially a book aimed towards kids, which is saying this takes place in a location. I can't tell you where for safety reasons, but it could be your town, which is a great immediate equalizer to bring it closer to them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that also probably it then impacts how much of, as we were talking about, the Animorphs book 1 is some various different forms of denial and trying to, in some cases, get out of responsibility, in some cases hunt down what exactly it is.
Right.
Which there's not also some of that in the Emissary, specifically with Cisco deciding whether or not to accept this post, but the conflict that everyone is stepping into in DS9 is much more you know, omnipresent. It's there. The majority of the cast, aside from Cisco, has their eyes on it and is moving towards it, ready to get to work. Versus in Animorphs, they're still working on are we sure we have to be involved in this? Is there some way out of this? Can we step back? And it ends with nope, we really can't.
Yeah. This is my bullet point. The alien stuff is very much an invasion of Animorphs' world, and it is.
But
it is DS9's world.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, for now. I mean,
should we talk about the Yeerks in the trailer?
We should. Yeah, we should talk about the characters. Yes,
we
should.
I'm so curious what your experience with the DS9 on the front of starting a story with the DS9 cast of characters is. Because rewatching it. There is not also obviously a central cast of characters in Animorphs, but TV shows and their core cast of cast members is always fun for me, and it was fun watching Emissary and going through and being like, I already knew, but here's all the people that I can tell we're going to be following. Here's all the major players. Here they are. They're turning up.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I was surprised by how like individual they were. I read Animorphs first, and then I watched the episodes. So I think I was coming off of how they constructed their ensemble. In part, but like all of DS9's crew come from, it feels like, their own story. Like Miles O'Brien is quite literally
walking out of Next Gen into DS9.
Yeah, I felt so bad because like I knew that was something. I didn't know what it was.
That's fair.
But yeah, I think it's really fun because I can see the starts of what they might do with these characters. And I think Dax was fun because they were one of the characters that had immediate history with Cisco, so that was really fun. Aside from the Slugs and Brains, which.
The parallels are so beautiful. Yeah, I kind of remembered like strokes of everyone's intro on DS9. I have such a special love, again, just from a yay good writing perspective, for the first conversation where we see Dax, which is like a minute and a half long, and manages to get, through a combination of this is good writing and this is really good actor delivery of writing, manages to get across like 15 different things to you about Dax individually, and the fact that Dax and Cisco have a history that is very strong and also undergoing this recent change, but is still strong, in like literally 90 seconds. It's great.
Oh yeah, and I think I also really appreciated like, I know that DS9 has some like core dynamics, and dynamics that they will focus on like in a particular episode, but like the sort of introduction with Kira and Bashir was something that I hadn't remembered, and I was, oh my gosh, you're nodding so vigorously.
Sorry, that scene is, I think I could quote most of that 45-second scene from memory because I think about it a lot. Yeah, that's a way to start that off.
Yeah, because like I don't remember them being like a core dynamic at all, but it makes so much sense to their character. So for reference.
Oh my god. Such a good way to start that out.
I keep forgetting that you might not, like, our listeners might not have actually watched it. So for the conversation that Kira and Bashir have is that Kira is a retired terrorist, basically, a freedom fighter for Bajor. Bashir is this kind of naive, young doctor who's signed up for this post because he wants to be a hero, and they clash, pretty vigorously
pretty instantly within about 3 sentences.
Bashir puts his foot in his mouth. Kira calls him out, and she cannot let it go.
With lightning speed. It's really, he does it and then he does it again.
Yeah.
Within the next 2 sentences, which is really impressive. And Kira immediately is like, absolutely not. Shut up.
As she should.
Gets about 3 inches from his face and then walks away. And I immediately go, I love her. She's great. She's the best. Nana Visitor is amazing.
Yes.
Yeah, I love... It's a great, like... It's a great scene of two... I don't even know if I can call it full-blown argument just because it is so fast and then they're out of there. And I feel like if I was say it's a scene of an argument, it would involve more like back and forth yelling. But it's a really fun, like, wow, they disagree. We are on different pages right off the bat, but also, like, you're like, oh, you're going to have to work together.
Right, it's a fun establishing moment because, I mean, it's funny. It is really funny. But
just
it's
instantly.
I think the fire in that also comes from the fact that Kira knows what he's like, knows what that feeling is of wanting to be a hero, of being young and idealistic, and you know, obviously her disagreement with him comes from a place of like, you are disrespecting my nation by basically calling us savages.
Yeah, you've walked in and immediately started.
Yeah. So there's like this fierce national pride, but there's also like, I know this kid. You know, I know where he's coming from. Yeah.
And then the immediate, like, from Bashir's side, you watch him put his foot in his mouth multiple times in the row and be like, oh my god. And then you also watch him and go, you did not, like, comprehend any of the things that you were saying as you said them. You got called out on them, and I'm now watching the gears turn as you're like, wait, I shouldn't have, and you watch that happen in real time. You're like, oh my god, there is a lot that you will have to learn if you are here for any number of time. Which is then contrasted really nicely with, like, that's kind of one of the two major Bashir moments in the episode, because Cisco and Kira are kind of the probably the two we see the most of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then I forgot, honestly, that the other major time we see Bashir, aside from full cast things, is later in the episode when the station is under fire. We get the moment of him, doing medicine in the moment. You're like, okay, the two things we've got of you so far are, you are very naive and immediately walked in and started disrespecting this entire culture, and also you are competent at the thing that you're here for. And that's something will happen between those two factors at some point.
Yeah. Well, I think it was really interesting looking at Bashir after doing Animorphs, because I think if you were to compare characters, Bashir is sort of like the closest parallel to who the Animorphs are. He's the closest to being a kid who's in the main cast. And there is like a through line through the denial and like crushing responsibility of this task in Animorphs, of like these kids reckoning with, like, is it like a video game? Is it like a comic book? Are we gonna be heroes? Are we gonna be like, is this, no, it's not, we could die. But I'm pretty good at video games, so it's
it's great because it's great watching them go through that loop that makes perfect sense for kids under these circumstances, of like coming to the realization initially of, this is not a game, this is not a piece of media, we are in danger and this is very real, but then having to kind of loop back to consciously the like joking about it, making it a game, having like batting back and forth the merits of the different wild shapes, making fun of each other for it, because that's where they have to go with that, because once you've hit the realization of the stakes, understandably they kind of have to veer off from it for a second and not look at it too closely, because it's terrifying.
Right, and that's sort of their favorite...
And they're kids.
Yeah, and it's their only frame of reference, right?
Yeah,
they don't have
all
like...
they have.
Yeah.
It's a positive and minus of... Positive and negative of having media as being so young that you don't have the... I mean, I guess this ties into the DS9 aspect where Cisco is explaining to the aliens in the wormhole of, the way that we proceed through linear time is that all of our previous experiences inform the ones that follow us.
Right.
Where the kids don't have previous experiences that inform, they don't have previous real life experiences that would inform them of the stakes of this as much as they have media and story experiences because of their age. So they have to,
right.
They have to fall back on those a little bit.
Well, and they are forming those points in linear time that will, like, define them later.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's multiple times in Animorphs where they're like, I will remember his answer. I will remember the screams. I will remember, the sight of these humans being enslaved. Like, that's the points of their linear time that will define them.
Yeah, which is great. It's so good.
Yeah. Characters, and we're finally going to talk about Yerks versus Trills. Yeah. I'm sure we will talk more about
I am
them.
really excited to see both Yerks and Trills, and also Animorphs and Odo.
Yes.
That I am sure there are going to be some I know there are going to be some lining up moments of many things in the future that are going to have some really fun interactions between those two.
Yeah. What did you think about Yerks versus Trills, and how, I know that we don't get a lot of either, really.
But yeah, we get some. It was really, it's really, so knowing a lot about Trills. Would you actually like to explain what, from the DS9 perspective, what's up with the Trills? Because that's,
oh my gosh,
I first watched this show, I was very young, and I have a wonderful memory of both, like, getting it so fast from how they set it up in DS9 within the first episode, but then also, like, the next couple ones. But then also not knowing how to explain to people who hadn't watched the show what the deal was with the Trill.
Yeah. Oof. Okay. So Trills, I'm kind of uncertain if Trills are a culture, or like the subset within the culture that undergo this kind of spiritual procedure. But Trills are the species that has, like, a symbiotic relationship with other members of their species that join them in a new host to preserve their kind of memories, some of their personalities, and sort of propagate and continue their existence that way. That is a bad explanation, but you sort of have to watch it.
No, that's totally fair. I'm also realizing that, like, we technically don't get the upfront, here is what a Trill is in Emissary. We get through examples, so if I am ever going too into detail for that and kind of spoiling it, please let me know. But yeah, that's the Trill have this symbiotic propagation of memories where via a little slug,
Yes.
which allows for, which is able to be in multiple, move from one body to another, from one host to another,
Yes.
across a long period of time.
What is a Yerk?
That's a great question that I was trying to figure out during this, honestly.
What do you think a Yerk is?
So the initial, and then so we meet the Andalite, which is a humanoid-esque alien that the kids find when they crash. Who then
the Andalite is a centaur.
Humanoid is not right. I was trying to do a mental tally of legs and eyes and got lost somewhere in the world. Who is an alien?
Yes.
That the kids meet, who dies and is great and really dark, and warns of the Yerks, which also seem to be small slug creatures that enter a host, which can be a variety of humans or other alien species out amongst the stars.
Right.
Initially, it's given in just sort of those very vague senses of the Yerks will enter humans, and they will take them over, and that is how they will take over your planet. We get more details towards the end of the book, which I really liked, where first it becomes apparent that Jake's brother has in fact been taken over, etc., by a Yeerk, has a Yeerk in his brain. We learned that they have pools that Yeerks have to return to while on Earth. The little brain slugs have to come out and go into these pools every so often to rejuvenate. Mm-hmm. And that clarified for me that when they leave their hosts return to their conscious selves briefly, mm-hmm. Are aware, and then the Yeerks return, and it is as normal. So there seems to be that these are two separate entities. The host consciousness is suppressed or submerged mostly. There is a moment where Jake looks at his brother and thinks he sees his real brother breaking through this other front.
Right, but it's immediately
clamped down by the Yeerk, which is the one that is in control of and piloting the body.
Right.
This led to the really, really, also really, really interesting detail that I'm excited to see more of, where when we learn this about the Yeerks, that we see all of them going into the pool and all of their hosts being kept so that they can be returned to them in a few minutes mm-hmm. or an hour. That there are some hosts of the Yeerk, human otherwise, that are just hanging out right. because they're willing hosts. Right. They're willing to be taken over, to let the Yeerk be in control of them, which is fascinating to me. And I really, really, really am interested to see that playing out in future books, because I have so many questions immediately.
Well, especially coming off of what we get in Emissary, which is that sort of the Trill host dynamic there is not sort of a binary one or the other. Mm-hmm. It's sort of like a truly symbiotic mix.
Yeah. It's not two entities.
Right.
It's one.
Right. But also what Tobias and Marco say about when they see the voluntary host, which is something like, why would they do that? Well, because they think that it will solve their problems to have to like be piloted, taken over, and then Marco says something like you do with the hawk, you disappear into the body of the hawk. So, I don't know if like there's any sort of Trill like that where it's sort of like you disappear into the symbiosis for a bad reason, but I think that was especially interesting.
The blurring of identity lines with them is really interesting to like compare and contrast, and I'm interested to see where that goes in the future as well, because I know that. I don't think it's supposed to say. I know that DS9 we will see more of the Trill as we have one as a central cast member, and that will come up in the future.
We will see more of the Yeerks.
And I am sure we will see more of the Yeerks. It would be very strange if we didn't.
No, the Yeerks totally disappeared.
They're never seen again.
They're never seen again.
Yeah.
But I asked you, or you asked me about the DS9 crew, and I'm going to return the question to you. I know we talked about their ensemble, mm-hmm. but what did you think of like the individual character beats?
That's really, really well done. The overarching theme of this is how to start a story.
Right.
Since we've got two really good examples of it. How to start an ensemble story that is multifaceted and going a lot of plot-related places very, very soon. Mm-hmm. And I really liked getting a pretty reasonably sized ensemble. I think perhaps even a little bit bigger than I might have thought initially, and handled perfectly well, of characters that are all very, very different. We got a lot of like good broad strokes of them that I'm excited to see get colored in even further, because when you're introducing characters, you've got to kind of pull on like the major threads of them first. Mm-hmm. And that was great. I think kind of the thing that probably stood out to me the most was Marco and Marco coming into the narrative and the initial debates of how to handle this thing that's been dropped in their lap with such a really distinctive and good perspective. Mm-hmm. I assumed almost immediately we would have to have some sort of argument between we should get involved in this fight and Animorph and we shouldn't,
Right.
because that feels only natural. They've all got like slightly more specific perspectives than that. Which
I was kind of it's been a while since I've reread the first book. I was kind of surprised by how nuanced they managed to get those perspectives. Like,
it's really good.
Starting out. So Jake is sort of like totally in denial. Tobias is really gung ho about this. Both because of his connection to this Andalite, and I think like his connection to the Hawk.
He's the first one and he's the first one of them to morph at all. Right. He's the one who figures it out initially.
Right. Rachel is down to fight, but she's sort of less down to fight than I thought she might be.
She's like determined. She's not aggressively eager, but she's determined to stay on her guard and stay alert about things, and is not opposed to fighting. Thinks that winds up being more on the side of this is something that we this kind of ends up. I feel like at the point of this is something that we probably have to do and should do, and something that we don't necessarily have a choice about doing, and those two are kind of the same at this point, so we're doing it.
I think she has a really, she has a sense of right and wrong, obviously, but I think what struck me about her is that, I think her motivation comes from the others, too. Tobias says he really wants to fight, and Rachel is like, I really want to protect Tobias. And Cassie says that maybe we should think about this, and Rachel says, sure, it's Cassie.
And then Cassie is much more cautious, and then at the same time is also the one who gets... Tobias is the first one who starts to morph. Cassie is the one who gets the best at it very quickly. She figures out a lot of the sophistication of it.
Cassie.
She's great. I love her. I want more of her immediately. And then Marco is the one who is coming in with probably the strongest, we need to back the hell out of all of this immediately. With not that it wouldn't be reasonable to be like, oh, this middle schooler doesn't want to get involved in a massive war, but that would be reasonable on its own. But coming in with the very specific, we can't get involved in this because I care about all of you. I personally really can't get involved in this because I have a family member relying on me.
Yeah.
And then the counterpoint of, well, that is true, but also the stakes are high, so what can we do? No, I loved it. They all feel very distinct, and again, just one of the things that struck me where I was like, these are middle schoolers, these are teens, they talk like teens, and they make sense as friends. I like a lot of the moments of them messing with each other out of both genuine affection and also out of nerves.
Right.
Marco gets a lot of lines in there that are really genuinely really good and funny, and really great dark humor for the scenario.
Yeah, I knew Marco was the funny one, but I forgot how funny he was.
And that paired with him being the one who's so strongly against everything too is really great, because it's both so funny, and also you're like, this is certainly a coping mechanism of yours. That's not a hidden thing, and you're also really funny. So
yeah. Thoughts on we've talked a lot about the ages of the perspectives and what that changes, but thoughts on how the personalities affected how this story got told.
Yeah, I think of the characters individually, almost.
Yeah, I was thinking because I think that not that either of them are unreliable, in the literary sense they're not unreliable, but there were certain moments where I was like, oh, Jake's not picking up on this, but it's very clear. Mm-hmm. Or Jake says that he's mostly as good as Marco at video games, but it's clear that that's not true. So it was fun seeing kind of those little lies. Yeah, blind spots. I was wondering if you saw any of those similar biases color Cisco's.
Yeah, it is. And this is certainly something we're going to get into in the future, which is medium of storytelling, where there are seeing things on a screen with TV and reading things in a book perspective definitely affects how deeply we can get into a narrative. Where it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier. Not that I feel like it's a little bit easier, at least for me, to be objective and sitting outside of Cisco than it was for Jake, for the obvious reason that I'm sitting entirely inside Jake.
Yeah,
telling me
Jake
this story
is so limited. You can't get it. I mean, it's first person and it doesn't rotate.
Versus it is a little bit easier with the whole DS9 cast and with Cisco to stand to this. Not that I wasn't deeply affected to it, but to stand by the side and kind of watch. I think in the first scene where Cisco is getting this vision of his first time meeting Jennifer, watching, which is so good, and Avery Brooks is so good. Oh, yes. They got such a good group of people to be the lead cast on Deep Space Nine.
I know.
I'll say this a billion times, and it'll always be true. And they're all great, but where you watch him be surprised by the scenario and then sink into it and then be so upset as it's ripped away from him, and you can see the grief that he is still sitting in, that we will get to in 40 minutes later in the episode timeline. Mm-hmm. That's there and easy to pick up on easier to pick up on as a viewer than it is necessarily where in Animorphs you're reading and you're like, that seems like that's something that's coming through your perspective solely, but I also have it, but I don't yet have all of the pulled back sides of everyone else to compare and contrast. We'll get there.
Well, here's a question. How have you watched Next Generation?
I have.
Then how was it seeing Next Generation filtered through this start of DS9? Did that change?
It's seeing where they intersect here.
Well, yeah, but how Cisco presents Picard, how Miles views is that kind of similar to how we filter differently through?
I think so. Yeah, that's such a good question. Thank you for asking that. I love that. Yeah, I saw. I want to say I've seen all of Next Generation. I can't positively confirm I've seen every single episode every time, but I've seen the vast bulk of it, which overlapped. Again, I might be wrong on this information. I do need to double check my timeline. If I recall correctly, the way that these two shows intersected, aside from the obvious, DS9, I believe, began, I want to say, around the 4th or 5th season of Next Gen, which was 7 seasons. Next Gen was still running and went a few more seasons. Okay. Yeah. So the events that start out, disclaimer for everyone listening, which is that I am fully doing this off of information I grew up with, so the timeline might not be right, and that's okay. That's on me. But Next Gen ran for 7 seasons, and the events of that we see the very top of DS9, which are Captain Picard getting briefly taken over and assimilated into the Borg, a computer alien hive mind. That was, I believe, the conclusion of the big season 3 cliffhanger.
Okay.
Led end of season 3, top season 4. Big deal at the time. Wild and crazy, really cool. DS9 started while Next Gen was still running. I want to say probably the end of season 4 or 5 somewhere, and so Next Gen ran for a few more seasons as DS9 was getting started, and we have the overlap of Picard and then Miles O'Brien, who moved from Next Gen while it was still running into DS9.
Oh, okay.
He was a character while Next Gen was running, and then he moved over to DS9.
Okay.
And was no longer Next Gen. I think it's really, I've always loved how they start DS9 with regards to Picard. Because Picard is such a... There are frequently comparisons made between the captains of all the treks. Because those are... It's an ensemble cast, but those are the heads of our protagonist crew. you have Kirk, and you have Picard, and you have Cisco, and then you have all of the ones that will come. Our noble heads of the crew. Picard in particular in Next Gen is such a really wonderful and well done, like, he is our hero, and he is a hero that is often tortured and tormented and goes through a lot of, like, what do I do? But he is our hero that we love and trust in Next Gen. That's, like, one of the core things in there, is that he is our protagonist that we're following. And DS9 starts with this, from Cisco's perspective, completely earned and correct objectively mistrust of and fury at and hatred at him, and all that has transpired from him. The events of him being part of the Borg, and thus the Borg being able to attack the Federation in the first place, not Picard's choice necessarily, doesn't change that they happened. Yeah. And having Cisco, who is also a protagonist that we see. First of all, in terms of protagonist introductions, Cisco walks into this show as a wonderful, wonderful, lovely guy who I love so much, who we see, mourning his wife and talking with his son, and also immediately blackmails Quark, which I think is
oh my
great.
gosh,
I think is amazing.
I forgot that he.
And it's so, in terms of setting the tone for establishing things, and this, I guess I'm throwing a question back at you. It's very cool to see that next gen. Sorry, again, one of the other kind of big thing with these two shows that are intersecting before veering off on their own directions is that Next Gen, as we saw, the Enterprise is a spaceship. It moves. It will go to a world for a story, but then it is gone. It does not have to stay there. Sometimes it will be there for 2 or 3 episodes, but Next Gen was always about, where is the fun new place we are going to next for an adventure? DS9 is a station. Right. We had 2 seasons of ships that were moving places, and DS9 starts with, it's a station and it's stationary. Starts with our main character, who we already love instantly because Avery Brooks is wonderful, being like, I'm going to go about some morally shady business acumen decisions involving putting this guy's son briefly in the brig because it will benefit the station in the long term, and starts with his completely understandable fury at basically the hero of the franchise preceding this.
Right.
All of which are fun.
It is fun. And, like, I think, what was the question you were throwing back at me?
It was, in terms of, like, I talked about how, for me, Animorphs is immediately establishing the, like, this is not something that you can escape. This is, like, in terms of the tonal things it's giving you at the beginning that feel like promises to be fulfilled. And I'm curious what tonal things DS9 is giving you as potential promises to be fulfilled off this first episode.
I think thematically, Reef, obviously, like, the aftermath of things. We start, in the aftermath of everything Next Gen, of course, but also the aftermath of this Cardassia Bashir conflict, which is not technically over, but over in like, the typical sense we would think of it, like, the way that a story ends with the war being peace treated. This is after the peace treaty.
Yeah. It's the part that the stories never really seem to focus on.
Yeah. It's recovery and it's rebuilding. I really loved how, like, both from, like, the individual character story, but also the larger thematic foundation, that it started with the spaceship that Cisco is on being destroyed, and then Cisco having to come onto DS9 and having it be totally trashed. Like, he has to rebuild not only the wreckage in his own mind, but also, like, this wreckage of DS9. And because it can't move, he has to make it be something.
Yeah. That's so true. That's really, really good.
Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts? before we get to predictions.
I was about to say that's something we definitely have to get to. Ooh, yeah, it is reductive in some ways to be like one of these begins at a beginning and one of these begins at an ending, because as we've discussed, that's not really true in either case. Animorphs is not beginning at the beginning of this conflict, and DS9 is not really beginning at the ending of this conflict. They're both at
a weird sort of middle.
major change points in their respective conflict, where in Animorphs it's the first time that people on this planet have learned of this conflict that's going on quietly in the background, and in DS9 it's the major shift where we have moved from war to an extremely tenuous peace and potentially some form of rebuilding. They both happen at these tipping points, and they both take these tipping points of something that is extremely big and is overshadowed so many people and so much time and so many places, and throw an ensemble cast at it. Which is always very good about everything.
Yeah, two very good ensemble casts.
Two really, really good ensemble casts. And I think it's great.
I can't wait to see where it goes. My other thoughts that are pretty silly are that does everybody in Star Trek really speak English?
There is a technical Star Trek answer I could give to this, kind of. Would you like me to, or would you like me to be... I'm sure it will come up in DS9 at some point, but actually, it might not, because it's a very next-gen thing that I'm...
Is there, like, a spaceship transponder or something?
Basically, so in Next Gen at least, again, I don't remember how much this is or is not going to come up in DS9 genuinely, so this is actually not speaking from things I remember in DS9 at all. Next Gen has, so much of Next Gen takes place on the bridge of, we see out through the viewfinder new alien worlds and have video calls with new species. And there is a universal translator that they have on the bridge, which is the show's way of being like, we may all be speaking different languages, but are all instantly comprehensible to each other, and they may be speaking different languages, but our magical translator immediately makes it so that we can all understand each other. Yay!
I'm asking that because in Animorphs, as the kids are discussing around this crashed alien pod, they do ask, well, everybody in Star Trek speaks English.
You're so right. I completely, yeah. God, that's... the worlds collide.
Yeah. And, well, that was another reason why I kind of wanted to do this, because, I mean, I know for a fact that Animorphs as a 90s sci-fi series was really inspired by Star Trek. Clearly. So
Inception is going to flood my brain.
Yes.
That also reminds me about the fact that in the same set of chapters, there is the one mention I have found so far as a person who is one half of this podcast, where the Andalite mentions his ship going through Z space, and I paused and yelled and took a photo of the word Z space, zoomed in really big on my screen where I was reading the book, and was like, There it is, part of the name. We have not had any further mentions of Z-Space, but I will be looking for them very assiduously, because I don't know what it is yet. But I'm really excited to learn. I got happy.
I forgot that it was mentioned this early, actually.
It's mentioned, but it is not... It's mentioned in the way that I love world building to be mentioned, where somebody talks about it as a given quantity and does not give me further info, because then I get to be like, ooh.
It's science babble.
It is... Oh god, there'll be so much of that on D. There was so much of it already, and honestly, there was less of it in Emissary than most episodes have. It will get worse. Yeah.
I believe you.
It will get so much worse.
I think there's probably something to be said about the Andalite's photo of his family versus, Sisko's longing for the return of his family. Mm-hmm. This idea of, like, what we keep with you when you go into space. Mm-hmm.
There's some parallel to be drawn somewhere between video games and Animorph and baseball and DS9.
Yeah. I think but it's a really humanizing moment in that sequence, which is so much about plot and like things happening, but in that same vein, when you start to sequence it so fast, the points where you slow down and really focus on like a thing, like a photo of a family, and how Jake is real sorry that it, like he can't return, and the fact that later Jake can't return to his family, that nuclear family is totally busted as well.
Yeah.
Just these sort of introspective moments and like very very plot driven shows.
Yeah.
Series. Yeah, series is the right word. And then also let Rachel and Kira say fuck.
Please, please. Oh God, genuinely, my experience of both of them, everyone in Animorphs should be allowed to say fuck. I feel like Rachel in particular. I'm like, please, please let her be free.
Well, I think there's like maybe multiple points, but at least one point where Jake is like, and she said some words that I didn't think that she knew,
which is always such a great way of. I love watching books, especially books for kids, censor the expletives were said here and refer to it in the funniest possible ways. I think it's great. Yeah, and Kira at all times. Rewatching this, having not seen DS9 for a long time, and especially not the pilot, was just great because I love. Kira is so angry, and it's so good and so interesting to watch every single time.
She's on the verge of every single time.
Our first introduction to her, for reference, is Cisco opening the door to her on the world's worst conference call, probably for both of them, but certainly for the other person, where she is in the middle of yelling at one of the ministers on Bajor and being like, "You're an idiot," and then ends the call abruptly. Which, incredible in terms of first scenes where we see people. Top tier. But also, yeah, let Kira say fuck, please. Oh my God.
We
haven't known her for 60 minutes and she's like, can you move the space station for me, please?
Can you move it faster?
She's like, can you move it? And Orion goes, in 2 weeks. She goes, can you move it in a day? And I'm not really asking. I'm just asking as courtesy. You're moving it in a day.
Well, I mean, it is really fun also, to be fair, seeing kind of the culmination of her character arc in the end, where she does not want to give in to these Cardassian warlords who have threatened to fire on the ship if they don't produce the other warlord that Kira clearly said was in a stable wormhole. And she doesn't want to and holds out as long as she can, but when it comes to the final decision, she's like about to surrender, because even despite all that anger, it's clear that the lives of her crew, the chance that, like, even though Cardassia treats their prisoners pretty badly, it seems, they might have a better chance of surviving there. Her responsibility is to preserve that instead of giving into her anger. And the fact that, her righteous anger is ultimately reinforced by Dax. He's like, no, we can do it. Come on.
Yeah.
But that's a really nice moment with that wrap up. I love her. But yeah, there's a really broad question for predictions and a really fun question that I can give you.
Oh, good. Yes, please. Both of these. I love it.
Not that there's ever a one-to-one between media. But
I feel a butt going on.
But if you were to line up the Animorphs and the DS9 crew
and do a one-to-one for each of the main.
Yeah. Or we could do like, if they were a Star Trek ensemble, which roles would they take?
Boy.
We could do a lot of these.
That's so fun and so interesting. And this is where my foreknowledge of DS9 I'm trying to delete from my brain quickly, because I know too much about the DS9 characters, and where they're going. Ooh.
Well, what do you think? Because you don't know about where the Animorphs crew is going.
That's so true. I feel like the Jake and Cisco.
Yes.
lineup is with the realizations of theirs being the bookends of both episodes and then being sort of the leader de facto assigned or selected to some regard, or in this case central narrator. Again, the concept of Jake as the lead, I think it was Tobias who is the character that says we all have our different strengths, we need you to be a leader, which I'm fascinated by because that's a really interesting thing to have said straight in the text rather than necessarily definitively proven a bunch of times.
And by a character.
Who
has their own, judgments.
Who is valuable and has their own perspectives.
Yeah, because, I mean, if you look at it from Tobias's perspective, Jake is the guy who saved him from bullies. Jake is sort of connected to every single one of these. Not that the other Animorphs are unconnected to each other, but we get the clearest view of how Jake is connected to them in this sense. But so Jake and Cisco.
Yeah, Jake and Cisco. I'm doing this off of the Animorphs kids just because there's fewer of them. Jake and Cisco. I think I have to say Rachel and Kira simply because please let them both say fuck.
Yes.
Please. It's so important. I think I'm tempted to say Tobias and Bashir.
Oh, interesting.
Which is interesting to me too. I don't know why that's the one I lean the most towards. I could also see, again, biased by the fact that I know a lot of things that are coming in DS9.
Why do you think Tobias and Bashir?
Honestly, it's kind of more the not understanding of the stakes, but initial disconnect from stakes
for the other
for something else.
Right.
In Bashir's case, this very idealized I'm going on my great adventure and I'm going to be a hero. And in Tobias's case, not that he has the same thing, but the bit of a disconnect from he's still connected to the larger world and the conflict and is still participating in it and cares about it, but also he drifts very fast
to the hawk.
Yeah. So that level of a character that's disconnected that you can see is becoming more connected kind of through force of events, things that are happening.
Right. Yeah. I see it.
I think.
So we got Marco and Cassie.
I was about to say Marco and Cassie. Everyone else in Marco and Cassie would be. I'm trying to remember who has or has not been introduced to DS9 is actually the problem here, because the other two I think would be O'Brien. The other two major ones would probably be O'Brien and Dax.
Yes.
Out of those, I would say Dax and Cassie. Yes. I can certainly see a lot of overlap, which is somebody who has a lot of knowledge, first of all, on a technical level, where Cassie is the one that they're turning to be like, this has to do with animals. Your mother works with animals, please help us. And Cassie has the very reasonable, okay, we've got a crazy new superpower. I've figured out most of the logistics of it, and I have thoughts about how to apply this practically.
Right. Well, I think that they're also probably more emotionally stable than some of the others.
More kind of emotional maturity and ability to mediate, where I believe it's Terry Farrell, again, if I mess up any actor's name, my apology, who does such a great job immediately at, I'm thinking about this because of other shows I've watched recently, and because of catching up on certain TTRPG shows, of people playing characters that are clearly, that look not young, but where you watch them interact in a scene, you go, you clearly have much more experience than I would glean from your outward visage.
Right.
Does a great job with that. You're me, Dax has seen shit. Because of how Patrol operate. But yeah, not knowledgeable, a bit more emotionally stable, but also clearly have some things lurking that just because they're perhaps more on top of it than the rest of the cast doesn't mean it's not going to come out. I'm thinking respectively of the line of something happened to the guy that tracked Cassie down, and we're not talking about it. And then, though it's not totally the same necessarily, Dax looking into the orb and getting this flashback to a recent point of transformation and being like, okay, yeah, and seeming like happy about it, but backgrounds, which would leave Marco and O'Brien, which actually makes a lot of sense to me.
They're both really normal guys.
So normal guys. But if I say the commonality is repression, O'Brien having this, leaving a legacy show part of the franchise, but O'Brien having this exit that he's trying to make understated, kind of, of being like, I'm not really going to make this a big thing, which immediately makes you go, so it is kind of a big thing for you, and we have yet to see why. Versus Marco trying to kind of push away from things and occasionally doing that with a lot of humor and sardonics and occasionally even just freaking out about it because he understandably is trying to keep a bit of a distance.
Yeah. I think that's where I would...
That's my line.
That's where I would mostly line up to. I would say Tobias and Odo might be interesting.
That's really... Ooh, that's good.
And I can also see Cassie and Bashir.
And
Bashir.
Yeah.
Like, not totally in the social disconnect, but Bashir's heart is in the right place. And I think Cassie has that same sort of competence and maybe further along in the other area.
Yeah, same level of competence and a compassion driving action.
Yeah.
Significantly more self-awareness.
So much more.
It's not that hard to have more self-awareness than Bashir. Sorry.
We love him.
As was evidenced by my fist pump earlier, I love Bashir very, very dearly. I will also make fun of him so much.
Okay.
That's part of loving him.
Predictions.
Yes.
So
what are your predictions? What are your predictions? Tell me this.
I think Emissary was the beginning of the ensemble, the creation of the ensemble, but also very much Cisco's story. So I think in the coming episodes we will get kind of establishing episodes for all of our crew. I think that I'm interested to see... Oh! Marco is Quark. Sorry.
No, I love that. Yeah, that's really good. Oh God.
I'm really interested to see where Quark goes, especially with having been blackmailed so early.
It's also, sorry, I know it's also crazy. It's because it's not just blackmail. It's not just like, I'm blackmailing you with something. His son, Cisco's like, I'm putting your kid in the brig. Maybe I'll let him out. Yeah. And you're like, whoa. That is a wild way to start that. Which is great. Like, Cisco's on that path from second one. Sorry, it's great every time. I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah. I'm interested to see the Cardassian warlords play a bigger political part. We had sort of like the external, like, physical threat, but there's also another moment where a Cardassian warlord comes into the office and is basically like, if you want to give me my office back. So I think that'll be it'll encroach a lot on the ship, that threat, and that'll be really interesting, especially with Kira being on the ship and being such a proud, defender of Bajor. And I'm interested to see where all the other tertiary dynamics develop. I know Dax and Bashir are sort of in a weird spot, but I think if they moved past that, it could be really cool. Kira and Bashir, I wonder if we get any, like really...
You just made the most fascinating facial expression, and I loved it.
I was gonna say moments that spark, but it was like, that sounds wrong. But any, like, visceral disagreements like that. And I'm interested to see O'Brien. He seems sort of like the normal guy that we need, but normal guys are rarely as interesting. So I think he has some stuff in him that I'm interested to see if he gets weirder. Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. I love all of that. I'm so excited for you to see so many future chunks of episodes. Absolutely.
And what about you?
Yeah. So honestly, kind of one of my major predictions is a bit similar to yours for the next, book/books of Animorphs, though with the way that we've scheduled things out, this will probably happen a little bit slower. I am, have some knowledge that we will be perspective shifting in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And so similarly would guess that the next couple pieces of the plot will probably cycle through learning more about and fleshing out the other members of the main cast. We got this intro to the whole plot in Jake's perspective, so now we're going to learn a little bit more about the 4 others.
Mm-hmm.
I'm suspect probably at least the next major plot piece and book will still be kind of, for lack of a better term, reactionary. This experience of adjusting and reacting and trying to scramble to survive and handle this new world.
Mm-hmm.
Since I suspect at some point further in the future, there's going to be a point where things flip and the kids start becoming proactive about these responsibilities that have been placed on them and this conflict they've been dropped into.
Right.
And I'm curious to see when exactly that will happen. I presume it probably won't happen in the next book immediately. Or if it does, that it might similarly end badly like this one did. So I'm curious to see how much they're going to be reacting still versus trying to take charge of the situation and what's going to happen if they do that. I feel like we're going to learn probably a lot more first about the experience of morphing into the animals before we then start to learn more about the Yeerks and the Andalites as we expand outwards from that. Mm-hmm. That is my guess, is that we would start with next time a deeper dive into acquiring new shapes to morph into, the difficulties in going in and out of these shapes mentally and physically, and that we might not go as much immediately into the conflict. We've got that we know about the 2 sides and the immediate stakes now. I'm really interested to see what happens with regards to Tobias now being permanently a hawk, because that of course is tied into the fact, the genesis of that is in the fact that he's got a pretty unstable home life and is said to be shuttling between 2 different family members that don't really want responsibilities. So it's very possible that the fallout of that doesn't look the way it would for the rest of the kids. Right. It's kind of going to be on them more than anyone else to navigate that. And I'm curious to see whose perspective we get that from, whether it's his, whether it's someone else's, what that looks like if he starts to lose more of himself as time goes on in that form. And I'm curious if they're going to... I can see the next story being them all doubling down and committing to sort of the decisions they made together before they then potentially fracture or disagree at points in the future. Mm-hmm. That would be my guess, is that they've had their initial disagreements, they made their call, they went in. It feels like the next chunks are going to be a little more unified, exploring the situation they found themselves in and their new powers before that then starts to complicate again and get weird. Not that it won't ever be complicated, but a little training montage.
Yeah, 90s training montage.
They go back in time a decade.
Maybe.
Anything's possible.
Yeah.
In both of these worlds.
Alright. Where can people find us?
In the stars. Or on Spotify.
In the stars on Spotify.
Yeah, this is fun. This is great.
This is awesome. We're not making any promises about when the next one's coming.
But these already have a lot of... It's a Venn diagram. There's a lot of things in the middle and some things that are very distinctly on either side, and it's really cool.
Alright, see you in the next one.